Welcome to Life by Design, episode 361. Welcome to Life by Design. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Krisho Jug.
Happy to be here, as always.
Yeah, we are creators of Life by Design with many locations worldwide. Each week on the show, we discuss the principles and the practice of Life by Design. Today, Krisho, we're talking about one of our favorite topics, and that happens to be selfishness, specifically as it relates to a meme that passes around the internet a lot, which is self-care is not selfish. And of course, we're going to take the opposite opinion and that self-care is selfish. But the caveat here is that that's not a bad thing. So that's the context of today's episode. Krisho, why don't you start us off with maybe a general overview of this concept? I know it's one that we've talked about a lot, but it probably bears repeating before we get into the specifics of today's episode. Otherwise, people might take this the wrong way.
Yep. So, I guess the first question is, why does anyone care about this? This sounds like semantics. And you care about this because it's these little inconsistencies in thinking that over time lead to, I don't want to say mental issues like it's a diagnosis, but
right.
these clashes in your mind, things like guilt and remorse, right? Because look at even the idea, self-care, it would bother it, and it bothers a lot of people. It bothers self-care still, even though the people intellectually understand the importance of taking care of yourself. And we'll get into some steps about, self-care and some ideas around it. But even that idea bothers people. They feel guilty. Moms feel guilty for doing it. Oh my God, I'm taking time away from my family. There's remorsefulness. I don't want to miss anything. My family needs me. So these are the types of issues that if we can get our thinking clear around what selfishness is, why and what it's not, and I'll get to that in a second, and why it actually needs to be celebrated. And the fact that, I love the fact that self-care has become very popular and it's practiced and it's talked about. And I like that trend towards, individuality and independence and egoism. I think that's a great trend in popular culture. But to answer your question, so yes, selfishness means that you put yourself first, but it doesn't mean, and I know you're going to add some caveats, it doesn't mean that you're this typically when we think of selfish, we think of like, this person that sacrifices everything that should be important to them, their family and their relationships, and they, go out and they do stupid things and they drink and they adulter and they hurt people in the long term. And that's nothing like what we're talking about. When we say being selfish, what that means is you are living your life in the pursuit of your rational values, not some whims that you're having at the moment, right? Like, it's not being selfish when you have this idea that you're going to go out and get hammered with your buddies and your children have something important to do the next day. If your children are important and they're more of a value to you, you're going to want to do those things. So when we say that being selfish means pursuing your values, these are long thought out values of things that you want to achieve. And it's okay if relationships and other people are part of these values that you're trying to get.
Well, I think, when you go back to this idea that you started with, which is that, words carry meanings. And you said, oh, this sounds like semantics, and it is semantics. But I think that's the false premise here, is that semantics have no meaning, and semantics are something that don't need to be paid attention to. And, one of the core principles of Think by Design is how we act is a product of how we think. And so how we think is in part a product of how we communicate and words that we use and how we associate meanings with specific words. And so as you alluded to, having these words that carry meanings and using them improperly over and over and over again, over time, they do eat away. And I think one of the things, and I know this is a personal experience, is they create a dissonance. And that's something that always resonated with me, this idea. And I think it's something that had affected me drastically maybe 15, 20 years ago, was that, it was almost like a pit in my stomach, an incongruency where things that I would say and words that I would use, and I started to look at how I was acting, and there was this, inconsistency between the way I was speaking and what I was doing. And of course, there was things in my life that were turning out not the way I wanted them to, and I couldn't quite figure out why that was. Of course, I was perfect. Nothing bad should ever happen to me. But with a deeper introspection, a lot of it started with just how I thought about things and the words that I used. And so I know the context here is self-care, but the foundation is words have meanings, and these meanings are, what we consistently act upon. And so I think just whether it be selfishness or other types of language, it's important that we have a clear definition for what those things mean, and then we pay attention to those things specifically.
Yeah, sure. So let's take the concept self-care. So self-care means that you are going to do something for yourself, right? You're going to do something, and by that very definition, that's selfish, right? You're doing something like let's be clear about what it is, right? But here's the thing, it helps you become better, which means that you get to pursue your values better, which is why it's important, and which is why it's good. Now, of course, what the defense of this, right, and the defense of selfishness, and it's an incorrect defense, publicly has always been, well, I get to be a better mom if I'm practicing self-care. So I get to help other people in a better way because I'm better.
Right.
Well, what if helping other people isn't part of your value system? Right? Like, what if you're not a mom? Right. What if there's no one else that you would like to help? I think all of those things are okay. I don't think you should be forced to help somebody. I want to, be a better husband for my wife. These are my personal selfish values, right? Like, I've chosen these. I want to be a good father towards my kids. I don't want to yell at them. I don't want to feel stressed out, especially when I'm busy. So I'm going to incorporate this practice selfishly into my life, because it's going to make me pursue all of the things better. I'm a better chiropractor. I record podcasts better. I'm a better friend when I'm taking care of myself. And that's why these things are important. And that's why they're selfish. And that's why it's okay.
Right. Yeah, I think selfishness and self-care is a tough one for people. As you said, to just go ahead and say, yeah, I'm going to take care of myself because I want to take care of myself. People always seem to want to tie it to something else. And I think part of that obviously goes back to the more, I don't know what the word is, cultural lack of acceptance of the idea. And so even if you start to go in this direction where you recognize that self-care is good and it's okay to do it for yourself and for no other reason, I still think people feel somewhat bad about it, and they still have the guilt. And so it's just naturally easier for them to attach it to some other reason why they need to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Right. And you look at our morality for the last 5,000 to 7,000 years, right? And it's the same thing. Happiness is making other people happy, and taking care of other people. That's the best thing for you to do in life. And if that's not, the number one priority in your life, then you're miserable. And all of the world's problems right now are because everybody's so selfish. Right. Right. And I don't see that being the cause. I actually think it's the opposite. Right. I think, think about what selflessness actually means. It means that you're supposed to, in order to be moral, according to, to this moral code, to be selfless means not only that you're going to not do things for yourself, it also means that you can't take any pleasure in the things that you're doing for other people, because if you take a little bit of pleasure, then you're being selfish.
Right. I think this goes back to the idea you had started with, and that's how these concepts can eat away. And, there's a case where somebody who would be, say, a devil's advocate might say, well, that's not what that means, and that's not what that's saying. But of course, that is what that's saying. And you can see where that path continues to go down, right? It's this slippery slope, because then the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and before you know it, you're just not a happy person. You're not enjoying your life. You're doing all these things for other people, but somehow, you're following this moral code that you have been told, if you do, your life is going to be great. And you can't figure out why your life isn't great, or why you don't feel great about your life.
Well, here's the thing. I don't ever remember, hearing the idea that your life is going to be great. I remember hearing the idea that you're going to be good or moral.
Right.
There's nowhere that it's stated that it's going to be happy. And now you see the problem. So now you think there's this divide between, well, do I want to be happy, or do I want to be good? Right.
Like it's a false dichotomy in that sense.
It's a false dichotomy in that sense. And that's a hard decision. What human being, wants to live with that kind of pressure? That's an impossible pressure. Right. Now you're doing things that are both, like self-care, that are both good and make you happy, but you don't feel that way. right? And now you multiply this by 5 to 10 years, you can see the going back to your concept, you can see the cognitive dissonance that starts to happen.
Sure. Yeah. And I see it all the time in people. And I think, we see it a lot in our patients. We see it a lot in our communities. And, thankfully, we're starting to see this shift, or, whether this shift is new, whether we're just more visible because of social media and other aspects where we have access to people's lives. Either way, I think it's a good thing. The next step is for people to recognize that not only is self-care good, but it can be good just in and of itself. It doesn't have to be necessarily tied to another reason why you're doing it. And so let's talk a bit about the actual to-dos and the action steps here. What does good self-care look like? I think it's probably different for different people. It's very much value-based, right? So today's a great example, actually, Cratio. So I'll use today. Today's my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thanks, buddy. So
yes,
I'm 44 on the 4th today as we record this episode. And, for a lot of people in practice this week, the question was, what are you going to do on your birthday? Because Dana was nice enough to bring in some grain-free cake and had the, signs up all week and, very sweet. And so people were very celebratory of the birthday coming up. And, what are you going to do on your birthday? I said, well, I'm going to get up in the morning and hang out with the kids and kind of celebrate my birthday with my family. And then I'm going to come to the office and record a podcast. I'm going to have a good workout. Then I'm going to go to Starbucks for 8 hours with my books and my notebook. And I'm going to sit there uninterrupted and I'm going to think and strategize and work on projects. And then the kids are going to come over and we're going to go to the movies. And people are like, well, it's your birthday. Don't you want to do something for you? Right? Or don't you want to do something fun? And so that is self-care for me. I can't tell you how much I've been waiting for today, where I had no other things other than the podcast, a workout, and 6 or 7 hours ahead of me. But for somebody else, that's like a nightmare, right? For them, it's, I want to go play golf, or I want to go get a massage, or go get a pedicure, whatever it is. And so I think the important point here, and this is why value systems and knowing our values are so important, I think you have to apply the self-care as a product of pursuing your values.
Yeah, I totally agree. Which brings me to something that I think is awesome. And I know that, most days you do a lot of that stuff. So it makes me happy that I'm good friends with somebody who is happy all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Absolutely.
Right? Who's happy, who's fulfilled, and again, going back to this, the concept of self-care. So, and again, I'm sorry if this is generalizing. It is generalizing, but oftentimes what gets constituted as self-care is I'm going to binge watch, a bunch of shows, and, really not do anything. And
which, by the way, I love binge watching television. So
yeah, me too. But for me, that doesn't constitute self-care. And here's why. Right. It doesn't constitute self-care because I don't feel awesome after I've done it. Right. Like the days, I remember the last time, and it was a long time ago. Now that, that the kids are around, is, my parents had them, and we woke up on Saturday, and I think we, had a few too many drinks the night before. So we weren't feeling great, and we just kind of hung around all day and really did nothing. Mm-hmm. And I didn't feel awesome, and I didn't feel energized after that day. I actually felt kind of worse, and it was the next day where I got back into the routine. I started training, I started reading, and I did the things that actually make me feel better about myself, So, and again, a good book for this is Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. I think he does a great job of just really hammering this home that self-care, involves something that actually fulfills you, that has some type of movement component versus just doing nothing and vegging out.
Right. Yeah, I think it's kind of an extension of what we've been talking about, and that's knowing what your values are and aligning your action steps with your values, which is really just the whole concept of Think by Design, which we'll throw the manual back in the show notes, guys. If you go to lifebydesign.com/podcast, you can find today's episode, and you'll see the manual there, and you can download it and even take a 30-day Think by Design challenge, and Chris will send you all kinds of videos, and you can listen to him talk about these things more in depth. And I think that the idea of pursuing your values through your self-care is not just good for you, but, the final point is that it's good for everybody, right? It's good for everybody in your inner circle. It's good for all the people around you. I'm a much better dad and husband when I'm able to care for myself, and I can provide more care for my children and more care for my wife and be there in many ways, more so than if I don't get a chance. And Cal Newport actually is funny you say that, because what's the other book, Cratio?
Deep Work.
Deep Work. Yeah. So Deep Work was actually really pivotal for me
Yeah.
You're talking about, how long it takes to get into a state of, And so anyway, within reading the first 4 chapters, I was like, all right, we need to build a little tiny home out by the lake so I can have a place to go. And I mean, that became a big project. We designed it and, saved up the money to build, did all that kind of stuff and pursued that value as a product of, having a place where I could care for myself. And I think, there's an example of, how extreme you want to take this is really up to you. And, I think the more extreme you take it, the happier you're going to be because, you're pursuing the things that you care about. So whether it be as a specific applicable step, having a private space, or, I know some people have a little cabin in the woods, or, even if it's just renting a place for a weekend and going by yourself, if that's something that matches with your values, or, building into your regular routine, right? Training is important to both you and I. And if we just said, oh, well, I need to work out, that's very different from saying, well, I work out at 10 o'clock on Fridays, at 4 o'clock on Tuesdays, right? So building these habits into your routine. So self-care isn't just something you do like on your birthday. And I know this was the point you were making before. Self-care is something that we do as a regular part of our routine.
Yeah, and since we're on the topic of ending bad ideas, this zero-sum idea that somehow, if you're winning, then other people are losing has just got to go. Because in real life, the way that it works, if somebody is really winning, properly winning, the right way, everyone else around them is going to be winning as well.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to, the accepted moral code and people just starting to think about these ideas and challenge them for themselves and start to put some of these into action. So if you are, I'd love to hear about it. I mean, we post these on our Facebook page and Instagram and other places. You can always send us an email and let us know what your experience has been, or share this and go ahead and comment wherever you find it. So great show. Thanks for coming on the show as always.
Yeah, for sure.
Love it. Guys, thank you for listening to Life by Design and joining the drive to 1 million families worldwide living life by design.